now, all the way up to 7.5%, 8%, 9% money is getting quoted for commercial loans these days. And because of that, all of the private money lenders are upping their rates as well. Well, let me stand back for a minute. Not all of the private money lenders, but some of them are upping their rates as well. Where we might have been able to borrow hard money at 12% interest with 2 points due at exit before, now lenders are saying, well, if you can't borrow money from a bank for less than 9, I guess my rates are 16. And I've heard a few of those private lenders and hard money lenders adjusting their rates accordingly. So it's not quite tied to the Fed rate, but rates are going up, and rates are going up across the board. Now, rate's not the only thing to consider. Loan to value, the term of the mortgage, how long that interest rate is fixed for. A lot of people who are locking in 5-year mortgages in 2020 and 2021 are starting to nervously look at their mortgage paperwork as they realize that that refi is coming down the pike soon, and their sweet 3% rate is not going to be that for much longer. So term is an important thing to consider on your financing. Personally, when I have been buying buildings over the last few years, I've always gone for as long of a fixed rate term as possible. Even if it's a higher interest rate, if it's 20 bits higher on the rate, I will absolutely every single day of the week take a 10-year note instead of a 5-year. That way I know that I'm not going to have to worry about dealing with a rate reset in 3.5 years or 4 years when the bank starts getting nervous and they start asking questions about when that refi is coming through. So make sure that the term is appropriate for the investment that you're making. And then amortization. This is an interesting piece. This is a little bit more specific to commercial and private lending. Residential lending, all of that is fully amortizing. Well, there's a few other loan products that are starting to float out there. There's 5/1 adjustable mortgages, 7/1 adjustable mortgages. There's some debt service coverage loans, but amortization out there, when it comes to commercial loans, you typically do not have a fully amortizing loan. And amortization means that principal and interest payments are made in the same mortgage payment. Whereas an interest-only mortgage means you're only paying the interest. You're not paying down the principal balance of the mortgage. So a lot of lenders, and commercial lenders and private lenders, are starting to tack on interest-only periods to these loans. And that's something that if you don't ask for it, you don't always get it, so ask for it. The next time that you're buying a commercial piece of real estate, ask your lender for an interest-only period. This can be anywhere from 6 months to 24 months. And in some extreme cases, it can go for up to 30 months or 36 months for certain types of new construction products. But asking about interest-only periods is a great way of reducing what your monthly mortgage payments are. And lastly, don't forget about those fees. Don't forget about the prepayment penalties. If you are locking in a 7% rate right now and you have a 5% prepayment penalty that doesn't burn off for 3 years and rates drop next year, you're going to be paying through the nose to refinance, and you want to make sure that you budget accordingly. It's not to say that all fees are bad, not to say that all penalties, well, penalties by definition are bad, but not to say that all fees are bad, but make sure that you know what's in there. So I just want to put up this quick scenario here to talk about the interest-only piece. So scenario 1, this is just a hypothetical buying a piece of real estate for $1 million. Financing 80% of it, so you're putting $200,000 down. Your rate's at 5%. Amortizing this over a 25-year mortgage, which is typical for a lot of commercial loans, and your monthly mortgage payment ends up being $4,677 a month. That is a amortizing mortgage, meaning your monthly payments are going towards principal and interest. Now, consider the same purchase price, the same LTV, with an interest-only loan at 7% rate. And believe it or not, your monthly payment is $4,667 a month, even though the interest rate is 2 whole points higher. Meaning that it's $10 cheaper a month to borrow interest-only money than it is to borrow at 5% rates over here. This is huge for your cash flow in the first year or two of your property ownership. If you're going through renovations and you have empty apartments, this can make the difference between a property that nosedives in year 1 and doesn't come back up, and at least breaks even and rides out through the period where you finally stabilized it. Things are coming in, rents are coming in, rents are at market now, things are good. So understand the power of interest-only money. That's not to say that you should always finance interest-only and never pay off your principal. That's just leveraging yourself until you die. but make sure that you use the tools that are available to you. So, lastly is closing. So closing. This is not an actual picture of keys that I've received at a closing, but boy, I've seen some key rings here. So a couple of quick tips for closing, anytime the week of closing, because trying to do this the day of is always a pain. Don't do this the day of. The first piece of advice is do not do anything I'm talking about the day of closing, except calling the utility companies, but you should really call them the day before, and if they tell you no, call them again the day of closing. Making sure that your utilities are transferred is important. I had a 29-unit building sell, and the property manager not call the utility company the day of closing, and the electric company shut off the power to every single apartment in that building because the property manager didn't call before close of business. So they will shut your power off, they will shut your gas off if you're not paying attention and not making sure utilities get transferred. In fact, insurance is another problem even. Make sure that your insurance is binding coverage before you close. 97% of the time, if you have financing, the bank is going to make sure that you will not close, or the lender will make sure you don't close until you have insurance on the property, but it does happen. Mistakes get made. I accidentally bought a building without insurance. My insurance agent told me that we had coverage. Told me everything was good. No problem. Don't worry about it. We got it. Yep, everything is fine. Bound coverage, it'll be good. Quick question. We actually need you to sign something. We should have coverage on the property tomorrow. Tomorrow? We just bought this house 3 hours ago. What are you talking about? Insurance agents can screw up sometimes, and they do. So please double check everything. Make a plan for rent and security deposits before closing day. Rent prorations are always a pain, and everybody has a different way of doing it. I don't care which way you do it, but please just agree upon it before you're nitpicking about, oh, is this 31-day month, or is it the 30-day month, or how do I divide the interest on this security deposit? Just talk with the seller, talk with the attorney, make sure that you cover all of this before closing day, and heck, it's even easier if you just have them put it on the closing statement instead of trying to pass over checks at the closing table and cash or anything else. Just have them put it on the HUD. It's way easier. Read all of your closing documents before you sign them. This is something that will rub a few people the wrong way, because I know there are people in this room who refuse to read all of their closing documents before they sign, but I am a huge proponent of doing that. I had a private money loan once when I borrowed from a larger national private lender, and they sent me a 270-page closing document package for a $150,000 construction loan, which was insane. I haven't even seen FHA, USDA, VA loan, nothing is that long. This was crazy amount of paperwork. I read every single page, and I found 16 mistakes in that paperwork. 2 times they mentioned the previous borrower, whose name they just didn't replace in the loan docs. They mentioned the previous borrower's amount, his rate, his terms, the property he was buying, everything was left in these closing docs. And they still had the gall to charge me for that closing attorney's time, too. I was furious with those people. But anyway, read all of your closing documents before you sign. This is, again, hundreds of thousands of dollars that you are putting on the line, or even millions of dollars in some cases. Take the time to read them a couple days before. If you have questions, please ask the attorney, please ask your broker, please ask someone. It's so important that you go through these and understand what it is that you're actually signing. You don't need to get all the legal, boilerplate language and mumbo jumbo in there and understand that, but just understand what it is that you're reading and what it is that you're signing. So, that's the purchase side. We're going to talk about the ownership side of a property, which is also conveniently 5 more stages. And I just like the fact that they all ended in shun, but you can use a lot less fancy words than this. So the 5 stages of owning a property. Acquisition, kind of already covered that, so I'm not going to go too in depth. Renovation, stabilization, optimization, and disposition. Which is a really fancy way, actually, let me just go back a slide, which is a really fancy way, I think we've heard this 5-letter acronym before, of buy, renovate, rent, refinance, repeat, something like that? I don't know, I've heard about that BRRRR thing before on Bigger Pockets, so I figured it kind of applies here. But starting with the acquisition stage, not going to rehash the whole course that I just went through here, so just going to give you a couple of highlights and quick tips for when you're buying a property. You make your money when you buy. You can't change the price that you buy a property for after you close on it. You can always sell a property for more down the road. It might take longer, you might have to wait a while, but you can never pay less for a property that you already bought. So make sure that when you're analyzing a deal, you start here and get the property for the right price, because you can't change that after the fact. Creative thinking can sometimes close the deal. Finding a way to be creative in this market, it makes all the difference between getting a deal to the closing table and having it die on the vine. We've had deals that have gotten very close to closing, and usually something comes up, maybe an appraisal issue that doesn't quite make the mark, or maybe there's a last-minute tenant problem that comes in that requires some money to change hands. Be creative in how you can structure these. I'll give you a quick tip here on covering appraisal gaps, because that's a big one that I've had come in recently. A few years back, I was working on a large deal. It was in downtown Manchester. It was a collection of, I think it was about 50-something apartments, 57 apartments, downtown Manchester. And we were selling these properties, and the properties didn't appraise. They came in a little bit light on the contract. I can't remember all the numbers offhand. But after some back and forth and trying to posture about coming down on price and coming up on price and whatever else it might be, we had a meet in the middle solution, which involved the sellers holding a second mortgage to the tune of 5% of the total price of the sale, held the second mortgage for, I think it was a 5-year term at a 5% interest-only rate. And that bridged the gap between what it had appraised for and what we were under contract for. The seller wasn't super happy, but man, we've been trying to sell these properties for like 9 months. I showed these buildings 30 times or so. This was a much different market in a much different time, but it took us a lot to get this buyer, and we didn't want to lose them. They weren't happy that they had to leave that money in the deal, but ultimately they knew their buildings, they knew that these owners were going to improve them and that they'd be worth more over time, so their money was safe. It was protected and collateralized by those properties. So sometimes creativity can be a way to bridge the gap when it comes to appraisals, or sometimes you can find other solutions to get a deal closed. So don't just think about the deal. I mentioned this before. Think about your reputation. The way that you conduct business and the way that you do business with this seller and with the industry as a whole, it means something. The brokers that you're dealing with, they remember you. The closing companies that you're dealing with, they remember you. The sellers that you're dealing with, they remember you. These people will keep their mental tally of, all right, was this person good to deal with? Okay to deal with? Did they try and screw me over? What happened during this transaction that's memorable? And as time goes on, only a couple of those memories are going to stick out. And if they were bad ones, they're going to remember those bad experiences. So don't just think about this deal, think about your future with this person, with the parties involved, and make sure that your reputation is the #1 thing that you take at